Crimea, the strike on the oil refinery in Russia, and the successes of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donetsk region. This is the war map. You're watching Freedom, and I'm Oleg Borisov. Hello, let's start our overview of the situation in temporarily occupied Crimea. Special forces from the main intelligence directorate's primary unit have released a video showing the destruction of Russian occupation forces' equipment on the peninsula. 3 enemy Mi-8 multipurpose helicopters were hit, as well as an expensive Russian Nebo-U radar system. In addition to the destruction of Russian aircraft in Crimea, another key and important fact is that the equipment of the Russian occupiers deep within the temporarily occupied territories has become vulnerable. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported attacks on 2 oil refineries in the Russian Federation. These are the Saratov and Novokubishevsk oil refineries. The Saratov refinery accounts for approximately 2.5% of the total oil refining volume in Russia. That's more than 7 million tons of oil annually. As for the Novokubishevsk refinery, it processes about 9 million tons of oil per year. According to preliminary information, there were explosions and fires at the facility. Interestingly, both refineries are located more than 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, which speaks to the effectiveness of the drones and their ability to bypass Russian air defense systems. Next, we'll talk about the Pokrovsk direction. It remains one of the hottest spots. Russian occupiers are trying to bypass Pokrovsk from the north in order to encircle the grouping of Ukraine's defense forces, but they have not succeeded. Ukrainian soldiers are carrying out active operations to counter the enemy. In the past 24 hours, more than 50 clashes have been recorded here. The Russians are trying to advance in the areas of the settlements of Donetsk, Krasny Lyman, Novoekonomik, and Novokrenka. Next, we'll discuss the situation in Kupyansk. Ukraine's defense forces are keeping the situation under control here. Everything possible is being done to prevent the Russian occupiers from entering the city. They are regularly eliminated, and the pipes through which the occupiers try to sneak in are shelled. The General Staff reported that fighting is currently taking place near the settlement of Kondrashivka. All attacks are being repelled by Ukrainian defense forces. And we'll discuss this topic and others in more detail with our guest, Dmytro Snehiriev, military and political analyst. He is joining us now. Dmytro, hello. Tell us about the situation in Kupyansk, Kharkiv region. Why have the Russian occupiers become more active in this direction?
Hello, thank you for having me. Regarding Kupyansk, this is the so-called thousand cuts tactic, striking simultaneously in several directions to divert the operational reserves of Ukraine's defense forces away from the main axis of the Russian occupying troops' offensive, which is in Donetsk region. That's why it's no coincidence that, even without achieving any tactical level advances, the Russian occupying forces are trying to create, the appearance in the information space that the Kupyansk direction is a current priority for the Russian offensive. But what is it that we really need to know about the Kupyansk direction? They're not so much interested in Kupyansk itself as they are in Kupyansk as a railway hub. This is a key railway station which, if captured by Russian occupiers, could significantly improve the logistics of the occupation forces. Regarding Kupyansk, all statements by the Russian side that fighting is already taking place directly in the center of Kupyansk are not true. The Ukrainian defense forces currently have the situation under control. Yes, there is a so-called gray zone on the outskirts of Kupyansk. It's an area of urban development that is not controlled by either side. It was precisely in this so-called gray zone that the occupiers tried to raise their Russian tricolors in order to show supposed significant control over this settlement. How did it all end? We remember, with the destruction of the members of the small assault groups and the stabilization of the situation. At the moment, the occupiers, I emphasize once again, are trying to expand their area of presence by bringing in operational reserves. But the ability of the Russian occupiers to redeploy across the Oskil River, along with their personnel and equipment, is currently being blocked by Ukrainian defense forces, who are destroying the latter with FPV drones and various means of firepower, mortar and artillery fire.
The successes of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Donetsk direction. It has already become clear that this came as a surprise to the occupiers. To what extent does this counteroffensive by the Ukrainian armed forces disrupt the Russians' plans?
significantly. And let's also note the substantial losses. With your permission, I will quote Russian social media channels. A quarter of the mobilized from the Tomsk region have been killed or are missing. Quite telling headlines in Russian social media channels, wouldn't you agree? It should be noted that as a result of the successful counteroffensive, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, particularly in the Dobrapilya direction, have deoccupied and liberated 7 settlements. At the moment, the Ukrainian Defense Forces are clearing out members of small assault groups who have found themselves in an operational encirclement by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Another village, Pankivka, has been liberated, which in fact allows us to talk about possible further negative consequences for the Russian occupiers, as it could lead to a broader operational encirclement. Pankivka is actually located right on the salient of the Russian incursion into Ukrainian defenses. In other words, the Ukrainian Defense Forces aim to cut off this salient with their converging strikes. In the Pokrovsk direction, Ukrainian Defense Forces have deoccupied Novo-Ekonomikno and Yudakno. These are significant tactical successes for our defenders. At the moment, the occupiers are trying to restore their positions and are transferring operational reserves. To understand the importance of this direction, up to 120,000 are concentrated in the Pokrovsk direction. And here's the main point, why? Accordingly, the Pokrovsk and Dobrapolsk directions were supposed to be used, not even by the military, but by the political leadership of the Russian Federation as a tool of political pressure on the Ukrainian and American leadership to show that supposedly, even without trilateral meetings involving the Russian dictator, the Russian armed forces can resolve the issue of reaching the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. As we can see, the situation is exactly the opposite. It is precisely these successes that allow us to say that the defense forces of Ukraine have effectively broken not only the military, but also the political component of the summer campaign, namely, the attempts to expand the zone of presence in the Donetsk region and, accordingly, to reach the administrative borders with Dnipropetrovsk. And now, regarding the most problematic direction, Toretsk. Fighting is ongoing in the area of Poltavka. Let me quote for you from Russian public channels, specifically the 155th Brigade. The channel is called Tricky Questions. They're smashing us. The Ukrainian servicemen are smashing us near Poltavka. It feels like all their drones and everything they've got, they're throwing at us. Advancing there now is like walking into an abyss. The brigade commander is yelling, not a step back. Victory at any cost. If you fall back or leave the encirclement, they'll shoot us. And then it goes on with some unprintable Russian comments directed at the brigade commander. This is already the perspective on the situation at what I want to emphasize again is the most problematic area for the Ukrainian Defense Forces, as seen by the Russian occupiers. So, as we can see, our defenders are carrying out successful actions right now, counteroffensive operations that are preventing the Russian occupiers from expanding their presence, including toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. And this is another big plus right now for Ukraine's agency in the negotiation process.
Dmitro, Ukrainian drones are striking and continue to strike Russian oil refineries deep behind enemy lines. Could these strikes force Putin to seek peace? What do you think?
I believe this will seriously undermine the Russian Federation's ability to continue funding active military operations on our territory. Moreover, according to Russian sources, as a result of successful drone attacks by the Special Operations Forces of the Main Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense and the Drone Systems Forces, more than 20% of Russian oil refineries have either partially or completely ceased operations. Moreover, the fuel crisis is being felt in several federal subjects of the Russian Federation, not to mention, of course, the occupied territories. It's also quite telling that, if we look at the reports from the General Staff of Ukraine's Defense Forces, the number of clashes has decreased. If just a week ago there were up to 200 per day, now it's 130, 140. What does this indicate? First and foremost, it shows that the successful drone attacks by the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense and the Special Operations Forces on Russian oil refineries have disrupted the logistics of the occupying army. The inability to fully, adequately supply essential fuel and vital lubricants directly to the Russian troops who are actively engaged in combat operations on our sovereign territory. That's why, in my opinion, this is a very serious argument for the Ukrainian armed forces and, accordingly, the country's political leadership when it comes to forcing Putin to make peace.
Dmitry, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the air. Dmitry Snegerev, military and political analyst, was with us on the line.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.